It is now my pleasure to introduce Lorraine Wilson. She is Director of Investment Products at Just Capital. She is leading our last panel of the day, which will be followed by some very brief closing remarks, and then we can all grab some lunch. Lorraine is going to lead our panel discussion on the unique role that veterans play in company diversity efforts and departments. So Lorraine, please take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, George. Thanks, Nick, and the rest of the team. Really excited to be here, second year in a row, representing Just Capital and supporting this great event. It's too bad we can't be in person in New York. It was just a great vibe in the room last year. But with that, I see my panelists are ready to go. And so I'll kick it off. Good morning. And so just a little bit about Just Capital to give you some context for why we've been supporting this event. Just is a nonprofit research organization. We use our polling of the American public and rank the Russell 1000 companies. Every year, it's clear the public tells us that veteran issues are important issues. So when you're ranking companies, they want to see recruitment and great treatment of vets and the military aligned community. And so it's something that has jumped out to us. Obviously, the team at Vets Indexes, they're experts in this, but we're happy to lend our support and to talk about what we're seeing, as well as my group of panelists who can speak to this very clearly. So we've got a lively discussion planned for you. Andrew Morton from SHRM, he runs the Veterans and Certification Affairs there. Mercedes Elias, who's the head of Vets Engagement at AmeriVet Securities. Meg Hendricks from Fiserv. Harris Morris from ADP. Stephen Hall from City of Houston. So we've got a great collection of speakers, and we're also looking forward to taking some questions from the audience. So with that, I will kick it off. And what I'd like to ask our panelists to do is give a brief introduction when you hear your name called for questions. So with that, one thing I'll note is that many audience members are still forming their own policies as it relates to recruiting and retaining the military affiliated community. So if we could be specific, panelists, in terms of defining the group that you're referring to, whether it's active duty, policies for spouses, and so on. So first question for you all is, as a group, we've talked about veterans being one of the most diverse cohorts. If you could talk about what makes veteran employees unique within diversity, inclusion, community engagement, and equity, so the DICE group, that would be great. So that's an open question to the panel.
Thanks, Lorraine. I think I'll kick it off. I think that's a great question. When we're talking in this current environment, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, even more than we were before, I think the thing that we all bring up, hopefully, is that, veterans and those who are currently serving are part of a diverse workforce, or were a part of a diverse workforce. I mean, the military crosses all racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, geographical backgrounds. So, I mean, I think that is an important thing to bring up. And also the fact that they had to work in that environment and make it work. They didn't have the option to quit or move somewhere else, generally speaking. They had to make it work and be successful at it. If they're coming to you and looking for a job, or, that kind of thing, and it looks like they've done a good work, then they have had that opportunity. And that is a really unique thing that not everyone else in the world has. And so that's definitely something that I like to bring up in these conversations.
And tell us a little about yourself, Meg. So Army vet. Maybe you could share a little more with the group. Warm us up.
Sure. Yes, I'm an Army veteran. I was an adjutant general officer, so your human resources S1 for those of you. And and my husband was an air defense officer. So we are both out now. He also went to West Point, to USMA, and I was an ROTC. So we both got out and have been out for about 8 years now. And so I've been working in the military recruitment, retention, entrepreneurship space for about 5 years. And I do it at Fiserv now, head of military and veteran affairs. So
Thank you. And I see Andrew's ready to go. Andrew, did you want to weigh in on this question as well?
Of course. Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me. And it's just great to see so many people, not just the experts in the space and all the other organizations, but individuals who are committed to hiring veterans. I think when you talk about inclusion and diversity, they are two distinctly unique things. And really, diversity does not beget inclusion. Inclusion begets diversity. And what I mean by that, you can have an organization that's very diverse, but if it isn't inclusive, then you're not bringing to bear all the different things that people in their diversity can bring to the table. And diversity is measured in 27 different ways, officially across the workspace, and whether that's racially, culturally, ethnically, in terms of sexual orientation, whatever the case may be, life experience, diversity is measured in very different ways across many different spaces. And building inclusion is really the foundation of it. So when you talk about the military and why veterans can bring an understanding of what inclusion is, I think there's two things. The first of which is, I think it is built into the culture of the military. So even if you're somebody like me that looks at its appearance level to check no diversity box whatsoever, my diversity is built through my life experience. I've been deployed to many different parts of the world globally that has built a cultural understanding of things I would have never had were it not for my military experience. I've been the only American male Caucasian person in the room on many different levels in many different parts of my career. And so, ironically, many people may assume the military not to be diverse in its construction, but the reality is the life experience that military service members get through the cultural experience that they have built into their military experience. They come into organizations with an understanding of what inclusion is, even if they're not part of what we consider to be a traditionally diverse category. So I think that that's a very important thing that we have had at SHRM and our SHRM Foundation to brief employers on, to get them to understand that while it may very well be you hired a male Caucasian veteran, that veteran has inclusion built into their DNA. And that's an important aspect of the military when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Thank you, Andrew. So we'll get into, we uncovered a lot of great information, in our conversations prior to today's panel. We want to talk about how some of the skills that veterans and reservists and the whole military affiliated community has, how sometimes they're overlooked by companies. I first want to set up our discussion to talk about, we've talked about this group being diverse, having this unique experience, and how there are 27 different definitions of what diversity actually means. I also want to talk about what are some of the unique challenges, and this is a question for the whole panel. What are some of the unique challenges that veterans face when looking for work, similar to other groups within this DICE community?
I'll touch on that one, Lorraine. Thanks. My name is Mercedes Elias. I was an officer in the Marine Corps for about 9.5 years, and now I work at a veteran-owned investment bank. And what I see a lot, especially as I interview veterans for either analyst program or internships, is that they do not know how to self-promote, and they don't really know quite how to talk about their experiences and their leadership and things that they've, kind of done during their military career. They don't know how to say they can listen to feedback well. They're a team player. They've worked in managing groups. And so what we do a lot of work, and I think that a lot of HR teams, they don't quite know because they don't have the same experience sometimes, is if you ask more questions, they'll be open. They just don't recognize that. They're not taught that at any time in the military. In the military, you're told most of the time, just do your job, do it well, listen to the orders that you're told, and you don't quite know how to self-promote. So I think the biggest thing for me, at least in finances, is working with veterans to let them know to speak more about their experiences, highlight what they've done, because a lot of times it's far and above beyond a lot of what their peers are doing, especially coming from college or straight out of active duty.
Mercedes, do you mind if I jump in there, Lorraine? That's a great point.
Yeah, please.
That's something that I, of course, bring up in our training of our hiring managers, but I kind of go on the other side of it too. We for sure need to train our veterans and like active duty or National Guard reservists to self-promote better. But I actually tell hiring managers and HR folks, you know, if someone keeps saying we, because, you know, we give successes, we say we give to the team, and screw ups we take on ourselves, right? So like, it's going to be hard for us to say that, you know, I did this. And so if you're doing a behavioral interview, I say, frankly, just tell them, look, I'm going to keep asking you until you tell me what you did. And so it's no fault, you know, just be like, it's no fault of your own, but I want you to tell me what you did. And I get it, like you as a veteran, or you in the National Guard, a reservist, give the benefit to the team, but this is what I'm looking for, and just be transparent. And that's really what I encourage people to do when we do our training too.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Megan. Mercedes.
Lorraine, it's Harris. If I could jump in.
Hi there. Sure.
Yeah.
Good morning, Harris.
Good morning. Yeah, Harris Morris from ADP. I run the Veterans Initiative, and I'm a 22-year Army veteran. So, you know, I love these comments, because I think everybody sees the same types of things as we go through, and how we approach interviews of veterans is really, really important. You know, there's a typical model that's out there that says we're going to talk to somebody for 30 minutes. I'm a hiring manager that may not know anything about the military. What I recommend to the hiring managers is to actually put more time on for the interview, so that they can learn and ask more questions, to dive down into things that they may not understand, and not have this problem of running out of time during the interview process. And, you know, Meg, I couldn't agree with you more as far as how do you self-promote yourself? And Mercedes, you said it as well. It just doesn't come naturally to the veterans. And so how do we teach them? How do we educate them in advance to come in and market and brand yourself? Because everybody else that's looking for that same job knows how to do it. And, you know, it's something that we as a collective community, you know, I think all try to do and help those veterans out.
That's great. So we've got another good question lined up, and it's you know what, I'm going to jump down, because I think that we've talked about some of this. I have a question for Harris. You've talked about in the past just kind of making the most of different team sizes. So how can someone who's committed but to this diversity hiring, particularly within the military affiliated community, how can they make this work if they have a team of 5 or if they have a team of 500? If you could talk to us about maximizing your retention and your recruitment, you know, depending on your team size.
Sure. And that's a loaded question, by the way, but I will do my best. So, you know, I think when I start thinking about recruitment, you know, there's a lot of different channels. And so as an employer, and I look at my team of recruiters, where are they out recruiting? You know, so I'm a little bit larger of a company, and we have people that go out to campuses. Are they going out particularly looking for veterans on those campuses, or are they just going to the campus hoping to stumble across a veteran? It has to be intentional, I think, in what we do when we go there. You know, and look at what other functions you have within your TA function. Just make sure that each of them are addressing that veteran component to what they do, not as an afterthought, but as something they think of as part of their strategy going in. You know, some people will use their internal recruiters, others are going to use external, depending on how you go. And so the question is, where do we find that veteran talent? Across the call today, I think there's been plenty of organizations that we all know that are nonprofits that are out there, or the military installations and their transition assistance offices. You know, these are all resources that I think a lot of times just the recruiters don't know where to go to find them. And unless you have a veteran on your recruiting team, somebody needs to educate those folks. And I see Andrew jumping up, you know, that whole SHRM Veterans at Work certificate is going to help them understand those types of avenues to go and to educate. So that's a big part of it. I would also say from the perspective of training, right? This is very much a supply and demand kind of thing. So what are we doing on the supply side to find that talent, but what are we doing on the demand side, which is the education of your HR business partners. It's the education of those talent recruiters. It's the education of your hiring managers who want that to bring in that talent. So, I think there's a lot of different roads out there and a lot of things that the veterans can do to help themselves. Mike Bianchi was talking about, onward to opportunity and credentialing. I mean, that's an automatic. If you can get a civilian credential, it's going to help. And it'll put you ahead of other veterans that are out there, no doubt about it. Going and having the opportunity to look at, what it is, DoD Skill Bridge program, for instance. A great opportunity for veterans to come in, have the opportunity to show what they can do, because a lot of managers just don't know. They don't understand. They've never been in touch with veterans and really just don't understand the skills that they bring. So that goes back to that hiring manager piece as well.
Right.
So that's a lot on recruitment. On the retention side of things, I'll try to keep that a little shorter. It all starts with data. It all starts with self-identification and having the ability to identify your population, whether that be protected veterans, National Guard or reservists, or even, a lot of great companies out there are looking at their military spouses and capturing that data. So if you're going to be able to track that retention, you have to know how many you have, where they are, and that will also help you kind of put those policies in place that you need.
That's a great segue. So good morning, Stephen. How are you? Talking about where they are. And so, we know that you represent City of Houston, working for the mayor. Talk to us about being, one of the largest military affiliated communities in the U.S.
Thank you for that, Lorraine. Yeah, what Meg, Andrew, Mercedes, and Harris have all touched on are some of the key elements of what we do here in the city. Depending on what population, stratification you look at or demographic you look at, Harris County is identified as the second largest veteran population in the United States, bar none. So it doesn't matter if you break it down by square miles or overall population. We are right now sitting at about 300,000 that I've identified in the last census. And actually, this next census is projected to go even higher, where we will rival LA County, which is #1 right now. But to kind of touch on some of the things you spoke to and what the rest on this panel have discussed already, we have looked at, there are 23 to 27 different departments in the city itself. We're one of the largest employers. And, data is key. You have to know how many you have, first off, in that military affiliated community, how many are that active duty guard reserve space, how many are veterans. And then we've also opened up the aperture in our own programs across all those departments to actually identify the military spouse as well, to include the hiring initiatives, right? So how we determine point structure and that sort of thing. There are some situations where we have veterans that are what you would say disabled to a point where they are not eligible to work. So what we've been able to do is widen the aperture a little bit more to the dependent spouse as well, so that if that spouse meets the skill sets, then they get the points that the veteran would have received as well, because the vet still needs to maintain a household and take care of their families. And so we look to do that. Now with, and I've said this before, bear with me, you've heard it. One of the things we look at is employers will do this from one of two perspectives, and perhaps both. They're either going to do it in a hearts and minds type of thing, a patriotic sense, where you want to hire that community and say, thank you very much for your service, but do it in an intentional way. So it's more than, military friendly, it's really more military intentional, right? Or you're really trying to put some effort into that. So if you're not doing it in the hearts and minds, you might be doing it from what we would term return on investment. What are we going to invest in that population? And when you think about the highly skilled, marketable aspects of that population, for me, and as I consult with other departments, global, this is one of the things we always promote, is that for your return on investment, you're going to find a very highly skilled member of your team, potential member of your team, that's going to be able to fit in, not only be a good support mechanism and or a leader. And the difference in that is that that individual that's coming into that team knows the difference. So they're not really rivaling from within, they're actually supporting from within. And if they need to assume a leadership role, they do so. We've seen in some of our own departments, law enforcement, firefighting, the airport systems, and that sort of thing, where their skill sets are already readily transferable. We've built bridges, if you will, between the military MOS or AFSC, which is your alphanumeric code that says you're a firefighter or a dental technician, right into those applicable skill sets that are actually in our civilian departments, and have kind of graded it in terms to know that the amount of technical schooling that they've gone to and or levels of education that they have are directly relational one-for-one. What we've been able to do too, and it was touched on as well with the skill bridge, the internship, if you will, we've realized here at the city that there is a great deal of cost savings if you can bring on a military member for 6 months into your department for free. That right there is a value add. Not only does that help you in terms of economics, particularly in this COVID environment where virtually every city relies on taxes and income that is derived from a number of things, whether it's conventions or taxes on land, or a myriad of ordinances and ticketing and sales and all of that stuff from conferences and all that stuff that goes on. Since that's diminished in virtually every city across the United States or across the globe, this is a very viable, economically sound solution to bring on a military member where you don't incur costs. You're not even allowed to pay them. That military member is still getting paid because they're part of the military. And there's the aspect of liability as well, because they're still in the military. So when I'm consulting with a lot of the other Fortune, organizations here in Houston, which is a mecca for a lot of the headquarters organizations here, this is how I advise them to look at that veteran population, and also how to partner with SHRM. And in this particular situation, since we're in Texas, the workforce commissions and the veteran commission, to make sure there are incentives so the paperwork is kind of lined out and makes it a little easier. And I'll let it go with that. But the talent acquisition teams that I work with are educating themselves as well and getting a little bit better at this. The last thing I'll touch on is the veteran and or that military affiliated population and how they brand themselves. There's different schools of thought when you're in LinkedIn, using that as a professional platform. In some military, vocations, they say don't use LinkedIn until you get toward the tail end of your career, and then jump right in. And it does take a level of experience in that. When you consider the recruiting population, talent acquisition population in the civilian world relies on or leverages LinkedIn in a huge way, it's important to market yourself well. And simple things, as we talked about already, Meg and Mercedes, the rest touched on it when we talk about team versus I. LinkedIn provides you an opportunity to be really more centric, more on the I aspects of what you do. And then you could brand yourself as a project manager or an executive director or something like that, instead of what we've seen before is where a military member will identify transitioning military. And I don't know of anyone in the talent acquisition world that's actually looking for transitioning anything. They're looking for a project manager, or something that actually has a title that's really in a job description. I've yet to see a job description that says transitioning military. And so, getting veterans or transitioning populations to understand that has been key to our overall success. And in some of our departments, we have as high as 25% of our personnel are military affiliated. I'll let it go with that.
That's great. Does anyone else on the panel want to follow on those comments? Open it up for a minute. Okay. So the next thing I'd like to ask you all about is, and we've touched on this, but going out and doing this targeted recruiting. So in your opinion, based on what you've seen in your different roles, are more companies looking to hire veterans specifically with these target numbers, just like they might do from other historically disadvantaged groups? Or do you see it just sort of bundled into other efforts?
I can talk a little bit to that, Lauren. So what we're seeing, and frankly, what is happening across the workforce is organizations are targeting any particular group that they feel can really support the mission that they're looking to execute, whether it's a manufacturer or hospitality. I mean, Stephen hit the nail on the head. What they're really looking for is to solve their workforce related problems and to ultimately find employees that are going to be able to do so and hit the ground running at the same time. So there are definitely veteran related hiring programs that are affinity based, but those are typically the ones that lead to second year challenges and retention because they're maybe not born of an operational goal. So we see organizations right now, and obviously a lot of this is pre-COVID, but the labor market, from all indices that we've seen, will ultimately bounce back. What we see is a shortage of individuals to do the jobs out there that need to be done, and organizations are going to lean to and lean on any particular demographic that is going to help them fulfill that mission. And veterans come to the table with a good reputation of getting the mission done. But again, you know, from the veterans' perspective, I think what we really have to look at is we really have to look at the fit, because we do see a challenge with retention in the second year of veterans in their first post-military employment job. Veterans will actually retain at a higher rate normally after that first job. So then you have to ask yourself, what is the challenge there? And it's a twofold challenge. One, it's born of mismanaged recruiting policies and or veteran making a choice that isn't necessarily the most informed choice. Or number two, it's built on some of the onboarding and or workforce integration challenges that veterans face. It's ironic. So many organizations will spend $3 for every $1 on recruiting vice training of their employment managers and their hiring managers and their bosses. And we know that 65% of people leave a job because of a bad boss. Imagine if the military spent all its money on recruiting and no money on training platoon sergeants, squad leaders, team leaders, platoon leaders, and company commanders and first sergeants. That's not the way we do it. So we are trying to convince organizations that recruiting the right veteran and having the right veteran come into your organization is only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, Andrew.
I agree, Lorraine. If I could, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll open it up.
Okay, I was just gonna say that, like, yeah, to me, I think it's good to have like a target, a goal, but maybe not like, you know, repercussions, just because a lot of times that's the way you can get like hiring managers. You need to have like diverse slates, you need to have veterans on your slates and things like that. But I think especially whenever a company is starting out with like a veteran hiring program, they focus a little bit too much on that goal maybe. And so to your point, Andrew, what happens is we say, oh, well, we have all these entry-level positions. That's where we're hiring most people into. And then, you know, that's when year two, or even if you get that far, you know, the veteran's like, well, you know, I came in and I wanted to get my foot in the door, but I'm not really moving up as quickly, and, you know, that kind of thing. So that's where a couple things are important. Like, I think having a goal is good, but maybe not having that be your primary focus. Just have it being something that you can use in order to motivate leaders to participate. But then also, like, transparency is huge with veterans. You know, this is what we talk about in our training as well. Hey, when you tell someone that's transitioning out that they're going to have an opportunity for advancement, they're going to assume that that's going to happen like kind of quickly. And what we're talking about in the civilian world is you could have an opportunity for advancement. I don't know. It could happen in like 6 months. It could happen in 2 years. We don't really know. I mean, sometimes, yes, there are some career pathing, but generally speaking, that's at least what I've seen is how it works. So I think transparency is important and a goal is good, but not going to be the primary focus.
If I might, Lorraine, piggyback off what Meg, both of you nailed it.
Sure.
I think it's important whenever I'm advising or consulting, I think it's important to get across that, you know, what's that old saying, that which is measured is that which is done. And so if you just have the initial target, they'll hit that and ring that bell all day long, but with no idea on how that actually complements the strategic plan in the organization. It's also important to make sure that when we are targeting, that we not only align with the strat plan of that organization and where they want to be in the next 3 to 5 years, but we also have to implement succession planning. And this ties in to the idea of retention, right? If we have these pathways that not only introduce those individuals to those prospective jobs, and the military member is really thinking about moving laterally into a position that, you know, they're willing to accept, and we know this, everyone on the call knows this, they're willing to accept a step down under the idea that they could promote or move into positions once those are available. But informing them in such a way and educating them in such a way that I'm talking about this, the veteran hiring or the military affiliated population hiring, in such a way that allows them to know they are part of that strategic plan, they are part of the succession planning mechanisms, however long they may be, then that military member has an expectation set with them that they then can make determinations on how best to, you know, navigate the system, if you will, and move through it. But it's also important to do it to the company culture as well. You know, as again, if we're just going to measure it as a target and we're going to try to hit X amount of vets or get to a certain percentage, we may do that. And then that's, if ill-informed, that's where you see the precipitous drop off in an organization not being able to retain those military members or military affiliated community.
That's a great point. And one thing that's always been interesting to me when speaking to family members in the community is, you know, your day job, you might be responsible for a handful of people in your civilian job. And, you know, then we have people like my brother-in-law next summer talk about 800 people that he's responsible for as Marine. So it's just that disconnect between your expectations in the private sector and how long it might take to move up versus more clear cut within the military.
And if I could just real quickly, I know we're running time, but that's a great point. And it's not the responsibility of the organization to go through a cultural inventory on behalf of the veteran. The veterans, you know, the first thing the veteran should never do is complete their resume. They should actually write what their purpose and what their mission and what they're ultimately willing to do post-military. I understand that economic realities get in the way, but the truth is sometimes you really have to ask yourself really what culture you're looking for. So as I'm talking to a group of organizations today, what I would say is lead with your culture. You know, the old saying out there as a leader, my platoon sergeant told me, never make promises you can't keep, because those are the ones that are going to get you in trouble. If there's no room for career advancement laterally, then be honest and open if you're opportunities to do different things within the organization. Or I want to give you time off to do things that are purposeful and meaningful to you, like work for Habitat for Humanity or Big Brothers and Big Sisters. Help you fill your purpose bucket post-military. I want to help you. A small and medium organization can do that, because what's worth giving one Friday off every month to allow a veteran to go do something meaningful like that? That's the retention that you'll get out of those policies. So be honest, lead with your culture, and allow the veteran to do an analysis of their own culture as you're asking them, what are you really looking for? You're 45 years old. You just basically, you were what I understand to be in charge of 300 people. Do you still want that leadership responsibility? Or are you looking to throttle back on that and let your spouse get in the front seat? Or are you wanting to go coach your son's high school football team? I understand this level of transparency rarely ever happens in the interview, but you know what? It would save everybody a lot of time, money, and heartache if it did.
I think that is a great answer. We did have an audience question, you know, asking about company diversity efforts and how companies should handle them differently, veterans as a group differently. And so talking about that purpose and being more upfront and transparent, I think that is a clear way. How about, you know, if I'll take maybe one more question from the audience, and then just want to be mindful of time. I know we're coming up on lunch. Is there any other questions from the audience that we have not covered? We did have a discussion going in the chat, you know, talking about how military professionals transfer to new units and jobs every 3 to 5 years while on active duty. Any comments from the panelists on that in terms of how to keep them engaged?
Yeah, so I think some of our panelists kind of touched on this, but when I bring my veteran employees on board, I do an initial assessment with them, and I ask them, what are your 6-month, 1 year, and 5-year goals? Because I want to make sure that the opportunities that we have align with those goals. And if they're not, that's fine. If they want to, you know, start with us because we're a smaller boutique investment bank, and go to a bulge bracket, how can we set them up for success to do that? Can I introduce them to somebody at the bank that they want to go to? Can I help them with their resumes, mock interviews, things like that? So obviously it takes a little bit more time from an HR perspective, but I feel like the more that the employee knows that you're invested in them and their personal and professional goals, the more committed that they are to you as a firm and as a company. And then they'll, even if they leave the firm, I've had many of my interns, for instance, refer their friends and refer other student veterans to our program because they knew that we took the time to pay attention to what their goals were, what their kind of career aspirations were, and that we did take the time out to kind of help them achieve those. So I think if you take a little bit of time, help them work through that, because a lot of them are very young as they're transitioning from active duty or still even in the reserves or National Guard. I think that goes a long way just for the employee and their sense of you and the company and how you take care of them and your kind of efforts that you'll put forth for them.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to close on. So thank you to all of the panelists. Really appreciate your feedback on this topic today. George, I will hand it back to you.